These are some fantastic RPGs that you've probably never played, and I want to talk about 10 that I would love to see come back in the form of an HD remaster or remake. There are so many awesome old games, especially RPGs, being ported or remastered. Games like Final Fantasy 1 through 12? Seriously, the entire library is accessible on something like the Switch. Xenoblade Definitive Edition, The Last Remnant, these have all been incredible to play again. And we have even more games to look forward to. Super Mario RPG is coming back, Thousand Year Door is coming back, we just got the Star Ocean remaster. Playing games like these on the Switch or a Steam Deck has been awesome. What a timeline we live in. So I went through my collection of games, pulled out and dusted off some of my old consoles, bought a new nice little portable monitor so that I could hook it all up and revisit some of my favorite old RPGs that may never see the light of day again. So here are my top 10 RPGs that need to make a comeback. Number 10, Dirge of Cerberus, Final Fantasy VII. Dirge of Cerberus is one of those interesting games that few people played or even remember playing. But there are dozens of us who love this game! For those of us who played the original Final Fantasy VII and loved it, this game was too cool to pass up on. Square Enix decided to launch an entire compilation of Final Fantasy VII series, which was a meta series to expand on the lore and the world of Final Fantasy VII. At the core of this series was the movie Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, a sequel to Final Fantasy VII. Before Crisis and Crisis Core, both prequels to Final Fantasy VII, and of course, Dirge of Cerberus, which was a sequel released in 2006, which took place 1 year after the events of Advent Children. Now, the movie was the first time that we had seen the Final Fantasy VII world in the full CGI beauty. And needless to say, there were so many of us that were all aboard the hype train, and there was no stopping that train. Now, Vincent was settled on as the main character for this game, given his relatively vague background in the original Final Fantasy VII. They also redesigned and expanded on characters that were only references in Final Fantasy VII. For example, you have the character Lucrezia Crescent. That's old Sephiroth's mama. They also introduced a new character, this mysterious soldier G, who would later become the basis for Genesis, introduced in Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core. Another amazing game that's gotten a remake, and if you haven't yet played that remake on the Switch or the PS5, what are you doing? Go pick that one up. Dirge of Cerberus starts off with a CG cutscene that made use of the Advent Children character models, and I cannot overstate how mind-blowing this was to see on a PS2. These, of course, did not represent the main game and the main graphics of the game, which were closer to something like Kingdom Hearts 2, but the overall package was so incredible. Again, we went from this to this. Then they introduced the player to this remnant of Shinra known as Deep Ground. And they introduced them in one of the most brutal ways possible as they swoop in and start attacking a bunch of civilians in the middle of a celebration. And this kicks off the adventure as you learn more of Vincent's story, more about Lucrezia and Hojo from Final Fantasy VII, and that Vincent is being hunted by a top-ranking group in Deep Ground known as the Sphiets over something called the Proto-Materia. So they can use it to awaken Omega, this creature who could bring the end of all life on the planet earlier than scheduled. It's pretty intense. Now, unlike the typical Final Fantasy game, the gameplay of this is entirely focused on Vincent and his gunplay, with some very simple and straightforward melee strikes. Instead of focusing on different weapons, armor, and accessories, and materia for different characters like Final Fantasy VII, it's all about customizing Vincent's guns. You could make an epic triple-barreled Gatling gun, a Griffin, a rifle, the Hydra, or stick with the short to mid-distance pistol build, the Cerberus. With a variety of materia magic to choose from, you also have limit breaks where Vincent turns into a Galleon beast from the original, as well as good old chaos. While I immensely enjoyed this game, there wasn't a lot of love for it when it came out. The game could be clunky at times with its aiming, melee combat, and materia, and while I got used to it and found it incredibly enjoyable, I don't think it aged particularly well. So anyway, I would love to see this one get the remake treatment given how well they handled Barret and Yuffie with their long-range abilities in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and that's what makes this one kind of interesting. Do I think there's a chance this one will come back? Well, in addition to the awesome combat from Final Fantasy VII Remake, the DLC did introduce some notable Deep Ground characters from this game, and the upcoming Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will bring us to the section of the original game where Vincent showed up. So it's very possible that the story will be brought back in one way or another, and it's possible the remake remake itself is setting us up for some sort of Dirge of Cerberus redux, with some major enhancements to the overall package based on the remake battle system, graphics, story, etc. Whatever they would decide to do, that would be awesome. I'm all in. Oh, and apparently Square considered a game like this for Irvine from Final Fantasy VIII, Barrett from 7, and Yuna from 10-2. While I'm not sure those would do as well as Dirge of Cerberus, not that it did that well, I would also love to see those. That would be kind of great. Number 9, Infinite Undiscovery. Infinite Undiscovery is one of the few games developed by Tri-Ace, a studio who will be strongly represented in this list, that isn't connected to an existing franchise. This game came out in September of 2008 and was part of Microsoft's massive push to get a strong RPG presence on the Xbox 360. This one was an exclusive. The initial plan was to have Microsoft publish the game, but it was handed off to Square Enix, putting this game in the interesting position of having its copyright shared by both Microsoft and Square Enix. So that likely means we won't be seeing this bad boy showing up on the Switch anytime soon, if it ever comes back at all. Now, Tri-Ace won me over with games from the Star Ocean series, Valkyrie Profile, and others that may or may not show up on this list. Spoilers. So I was really excited to see RPGs like this coming to the 360. Infinite Undiscovery, perhaps the trendsetter for ridiculous Square Enix game names like Octopath Traveler and Triangle Strategy, throws you into a world where the moon that has magical powers responsible for bringing about life is chained to the world by some evil order. The chains bring about monsters, sickness, and plague to the land, and a character named Sigmund is given this godlike reverence for mobilizing his band of misfits to destroy these chains. Capel, the main character, is a bit of a cowardly bard and starts the game by being imprisoned in a case of mistaken identity because he looks exactly like Sigmund, apparently. After being freed by one of Sigmund's companions, Aya, he is hesitantly thrown into the action by being tasked with saving her from this sickness while the party otherwise continues on their journey to destroy the nearby chain. As time and adventure continue, he's forced to take upon Sigmund's task and title to liberate the world, but with the added benefits of his trusty dragon flute. Who says you can't be a warrior hero and a musician, am I right? Anyway, Tri-Ace, like most of their RPGs, took a bit of a different approach from the traditional turn-based RPGs, making it more of an action RPG where traversal and battles are seamless, and you control Capel, unsheath to fight, unleash combos, and end with some cool special attacks. The thing about these combos is that they add additional benefits like healing, experience, or AP boosts when doing things like keeping an enemy in the air. A bit into this game, you can also separate 4-person parties roaming dungeons or the overworld to battle, which was pretty awesome to see. I don't remember if there was any major benefit to do this, but it did make the fighting feel more alive and with all the characters around rather than being tucked away in a menu. Outside of battle, you have the ability to craft and enhance stats depending on who's in your party, making this whole package feel almost like a Star Ocean spin-off game, which makes sense. It is Tri-Ace after all. Now, this game received some mixed reviews when it came out, with a bit of slowdown, what was considered a pretty basic story, and some steep enemy encounters. But overall, I really enjoyed this game, especially as it continued on. I will admit, when I first started playing it, it took a while to get into. I wasn't sure if I was going to like this game, but once I hit that aha moment, I was in for the ride, and it was great. If in some magical world this game came back, I would love to see them tighten up some of their performance, especially with some input delay on the attacks, but I can see this one being an incredibly enjoyable experience if it got some of the remake treatment on something like the Switch. Or maybe just a remaster, if what you mean by remaster is what they did with Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core. Considering this is a Tri-Ace Square Enix game, I'd say it doesn't have a 0% chance of coming back. After all, Square Enix has recently been making more pushes to bring some of their old franchises back, but given that this one didn't rate super well, and according to what I could find, it didn't even look like it hit over 500k units in its lifetime sales, I'm not really sure this one's a priority, to be honest. But hey, one of the cool things is, if you buy the physical Xbox 360 game and you have an Xbox Series X, you can play the upscaled version of this game. So that kind of counts. Number 8. Eternal Sonata. Eternal Sonata initially released in 2007 on the Xbox 360 and later on the PS3, and this may be one of the most unique RPG concepts on this list. This was developed by Tricrescendo, a studio initially responsible for all the sound design in the Tri-Ace games, before working on games like Baten Kaitos with Monolith Soft and Eternal Sonata, among others. And I love that sound design, by the way. Those sweet button sounds. According to the director, the intent of this game was to help people understand more about famed classical musician Frédéric Chopin, as well as his music. Chopin, Chopin, Chopin. So what was the best way to do that? Make an RPG set in the fictional world of his dream hours before he died at the age of 19 from tuberculosis. That's how. Take some notes, developers. Joking aside, I loved the very concept of this game. Coming from a band background in high school, the merging of classical music and video games in the form of an RPG was dreamy, and I played the heck out of this game with a really good friend of mine. Shoutouts to Renee, who will be coming up again in this video. We were able to get through it in a decent time. I think it was about 20 or 30 hours. No Persona 5 commitment here. The game has a heavy emphasis on a number of moral and philosophical themes like death, war, love, etc. And it has this interesting blend of gameplay and music appreciation, education almost, that I've not seen in any other game. And this wasn't just a blank canvas for an RPG by making it a dream. If we just call it a dream, we could do whatever we want and profit on the popularity of Chopin. The developers did a great job tying scenes from real life events from his life that could, in theory, lead to a crazy dream like this. And the game is just beautiful. The scenes, the music, it's all such a great package. Chopin's music, of course, is in the game, but the original soundtrack by Motoi Sakuraba, the composer responsible for awesome music in almost all of the Tri-Ace games, is also fantastic. As for the gameplay, this game ramped up in difficulty with the way the battle system worked, but it was so fun and unique, especially for its time. Battles happen in battle arenas where there are light and shadowed spots that can impact both character and enemy abilities. In addition to that, you have a time bar that quickly depletes once you start moving, so you have to think about your actions. So if you need to make it to your enemy before attacking, you may only be able to pull off a few hits here and there. But then your gauge fills up, you can finish with a combo or a special attack for massive damage as well. This made for a really dynamic, interesting, and some strategic gameplay. Oh, and once you get Viola, you basically don't need to do anything else. She will break the game. The biggest criticism for this game is that, though beautiful in many ways, there are areas where the scope is kind of limited. Enemy variety is limited, outfits from equipping new weapons and armor don't actually change the characters, and the environments are beautiful, but they're pretty straightforward. Well, that, and there are some really long-winded scenes that felt like a waste of time. So if they were to remake this, I would love to see them put a little bit more effort into sprucing some things up. Even new outfits from armor and weapons could do a lot to make this feel fresh. But if they could expand on dungeons, add new additional content, etc., that'd be really great. That being said, if they just brought this back, I'd be a happy boy. As to whether or not I think this one will come back, I'd say it's possible. Bandai did just remaster Baten Kaitos and Baten Kaitos Origins for the Switch, so this could absolutely come back. I'd say, if I were to guess, we may see it pop up in the next few years. And I'll be honest, I wouldn't mind a sequel of sorts as well. I know you can't really follow up on Chopin because, he did. But they could choose another famous composer to work with. Who knows? I'd love to see it. Number 7. Suikoden V. Suikoden V released on the PS2 in March of 2006, not long before the PS3 came out, and while it was the last main installment that we've seen from the series, it was the first Suikoden game that I had ever played. And this was the game that got me hooked on the entire series, except for Suikoden Tactics. You and I will meet one day. What I didn't know at the time was that this game was a prequel of sorts to Suikoden 1 and 2, which I love. And they're coming back to the Switch! But without any other context, the story and gameplay of this game blew my mind. Suikoden 5's story revolves around political tensions and power struggles in the queendom of Falena, ruled by Queen Arshtat, the mother of the main character. Queen Arshtat, normally a mild-mannered and doting mother, is taken over by this Sun Rune, one of the 27 true runes, and it starts making her a bit, insane. Anyway, through a series of events, the prince is eventually forced to flee and fight against those who would oppose the group. This, it turns out, is the classic Suikoden setup where the main character is forced to build from the bottom and recruit as many as 108 characters known as the Stars of Destiny to build up their army. And if you can pull that off, you're rewarded with the best ending. Each of the characters you can recruit have their own backstory and unique styles. As for the game mechanics, let's start with the top with the more traditional on-the-ground battle system. First, you have your 6 characters in your party, and you can make use of formations to organize those characters. Now what this does is it provides a statistical advantage, and there's some special formation-specific abilities. Characters have your attack and magic options like you might expect, as well as unite attacks between some of the characters, and they added an auto attack option for some of those random encounters to go more quickly in this game, which was nice. Characters also gain SP in battles to increase stats in addition to your normal level ups. Next, this game also has a full RTS-like army battle system between different armies at different points in the game which I was not at all expecting. And each character could be a general of an army with an army-specific skill, which was really cool. Again, never having played a Suikoden game before, this was a huge surprise for me. And finally, they also have these 1v1 duels with other characters throughout the game. These duels act like rock, paper, scissors battles, where you have to read your opponent's comments to determine if they're going to attack, defend, or use a special, and you need to respond with the correct option. When it was all said and done, this ended up being one of the most unique takes on RPG battle systems I'd seen on the PS2, or maybe ever at that point. And even today, I'd argue the Suikoden series is incredibly unique. Remaking this and improving the performance could make it feel more like it respects your time when it comes to the battle transitions, and even how you navigate through some of the menus. In addition to this, many of the towns and dungeons were either way too big or a bit uninteresting. Oh, and if you have any hope of recruiting the 108 Stars of Destinies to get the best ending, you better use a guide. There's no way you're going to just stumble upon all of them, and many are completely missable at certain parts of the game. But with all of that said, I absolutely loved this game. It's really too bad that this game didn't perform that well and would end up being the end of the mainline Suikoden series for now, but there's still hope. With Suikoden 1 and 2 being remastered and the success of the Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes Kickstarter, who knows? Maybe Konami's listening, and maybe we'll see this game again. And I really hope we do, because this is one of the most expensive games to get if you want to play it now. Number 6, Blue Dragon. Blue Dragon was released on the Xbox 360 in August of 2007 as an exclusive RPG developed by the new Microsoft-funded studio called Mistwalker. This was another part of Microsoft's major push to get those RPGs on the 360. Microsoft, you need to learn a thing or two from the 360 era. Now, Mistwalker was helmed by the legendary Hironobu Sakaguchi, the father of Final Fantasy, and creator who helped bring us games like Chrono Trigger. Alongside Mr. Sakaguchi was Nobuo Uematsu, the composer of the Final Fantasy series. And if you watched my Sea of Stars review, you know how I feel about music and RPGs. Like and subscribe if you feel the same. And it didn't end there. Akira Toriyama of Dragon Ball, Dragon Quest, and Chrono Trigger fame helmed the monster designs and illustrations for this game. What do you get when you mix Sakaguchi, Uematsu, and Toriyama and the promise of a brand new RPG? A console sale for an RPG nerd, that's what. Not really, that would come later. We'll talk about that one. This game feels like a throwback to some of the old classic RPGs with a modern, well, it used to be modern anyway, skin. It felt in line with many of the other RPGs of the time. You have the cutscenes, over-the-top anime characters, with, of course, an annoying but lovable sidekick. The game kicks off with the main character Shu and pals who have their town attacked by a land shark. It turns out to be this giant machine controlled by the big bad of the game named Nene. Yeah, you heard that right. Nene. And this kicks off the quest to take down the evil Nene with a few twists and turns along the way to save the world. And the main traversal was on the overworld with different areas and treasure to be found. And of course you could find dungeons, there were some really cool monster designs, but what really got me hooked was the gameplay. Each of the characters in this game are paired up with a different shadow that gives them magical abilities and the strength needed to take down those monsters. With the main character Shu sporting the one and only Blue Dragon. In classic Final Fantasy V fashion, these shadows give the ability to mix and match different classes that feel familiar with those who have played any Final Fantasy game. By maxing out each of these classes, you get the abilities that you can mix and match to build out your party in different ways. Once you have the Generalist class maxed out too, you have a ton of skill slots that can make the rest of your class combinations crazy. Now, admittedly, this game is one you'll see a lot of mixed opinions on online. Some didn't appreciate the tried and true formula that Blue Dragon employed, but you have to remember, the 360 didn't have RPGs at the time, and this game feels very much like the Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and other RPGs that we love. And it worked. The 360 to this day is the highest selling Xbox console globally, and you can thank Blue Dragon for that. That being said, if this ever did come back, they could definitely use some tune-ups. But just getting this one on a handheld like the Switch would be amazing. Unfortunately, this game is not really likely to see the light of day again with any updates. Like Infinite Undiscovery, it is still technically playable on the Series X. Seriously though, get these games while you still can. But Sakaguchi has stated in a recent interview that he's not interested in spending time remastering or re-releasing Mistwalker's old games, as he would rather spend the energy on something new. While I can respect that, I really hope he changes his mind. Or Microsoft or somebody else like Nintendo can give Mistwalker the support they need to incentivize them to make this happen. Number 5. Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria. Valkyrie Profile is another series developed by Tri-Ace. Turns out I specifically love Tri-Ace games. The original Valkyrie Profile released in 2000 on the PS1 and did well enough to get a port on the PSP called Valkyrie Profile Lena in July of 2006, just 2 months before its sequel would come out. Even though Valkyrie Profile has seen a recent port on the PS4 and the PS5 alongside the most recent release of Valkyrie Elysium, Valkyrie Profile 2 is still stuck on the PS2. Now, these games are known and loved for their deep lore, immersive plots that are tied to Norse mythology, as well as their tragic character stories, as Einherjar are these great warriors that have died in battle and are recruited by a Valkyrie. Because of this, the tone of these games are very different than most RPGs, as tragedy is a core component. Valkyrie Profile 2 still feels like the pinnacle of the series to me. This game is technically a prequel, but it's kinda not. And the story starts by introducing the player to Alicia, the princess of a rebellious kingdom and the host of Valkyrie Silmeria's soul. Their adventure begins by dealing with the immediate threats of another Valkyrie coming for Silmeria, and Alicia trying to get back to her kingdom to see if they can align against Odin to thwart the coming disaster to both mortal and divine realms. Along the way, you're introduced to a number of characters, including a number of Einherjar warriors that fight alongside the Valkyrie, and Lazard, a notable character from the first game that's obsessed with the Valkyrie Lena. In the previous game, his obsession caused him to perform many, let's say, immoral acts and becomes one of the main antagonists. But this is a prequel. He's younger now and not bad, right? Now, navigation in this game was really interesting because it's all side-scrolling environments, whether you're in towns or dungeons, but it's a lot more compelling than you might expect. There are still many things to be discovered, and the 3D scenes still give the overall feel of an open 3D plane. Some of this exploration includes finding crystals that contain the souls of fallen warriors that become your Einherjar to build your team with. Fortunately, Arngrim, one of the coolest Einherjar from the first game, is introduced in the story in Chapter 3. Just like the first game, the battle system is unique to this series. You have 4 characters in your active party with buttons assigned to them, but in this game, battles take place in a real-time arena with freedom of movement, which was pretty cool. Enemies have attacks that have indicators with red areas that you need to avoid, and if you can dash to the side or the back of enemies, you have the most impact and fun. Now, this game was touted as being brutal, and to be fair, if you walk in front of a boss and not to the side or the back, you're gonna get hit. But the challenge is part of what made this game incredibly fun, and it stands out as one of the more unique battle systems in the RPG genre. If they were to remaster or remake this game, I'd love to see them address some of the performance issues. Bump it up to 60 frames if possible, give some more exploration options, kinda like the fan remaster. Shoutouts to Look Back Gaming for letting me use his footage, but we'd love it native. Honestly, if they could just get it on modern consoles, preferably the Switch, that would be awesome. And I do believe this game has a chance of coming back. It seems like Square Enix was testing the waters for this series. That being said, Valkyrie Elysium didn't do as well as I think Square was hoping for, so it's possible Valkyrie Profile 2 will remain stuck on the PS2 despite how awesome it is. And nobody even knows what Valkyrie Profile Covenant of the Plume on the DS is. But Square, you can totally bring that one back too. Number 4. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. After my love for Fire Emblem 7 and 8 on the Game Boy Advance, otherwise known as simply Fire Emblem and Fire Emblem the Sacred Stones, I was really excited to learn that they were finally coming out with a Fire Emblem experience on the GameCube in 2005. Also, as a side note, you can assume that any Fire Emblem game could have made this list. This was the series' first foray into 3D graphics and cutscenes and voice acting, and apparently this came with many development challenges. But this wasn't Game Freak, so it turned out pretty darn good. There were later interviews where some of the producers confessed they considered this game to be about 70% complete at release, which tells me this gem is primed for a definitive edition, am I right? This game was, of course, followed by a sequel, Radiant Dawn, that I would also love to see come back, but I think this game stood out to me as the more memorable overall experience. That, and it's not insanely hard, and Ike is still one of my favorite Fire Emblem lords of all time. The premise of this game is that a neighboring country, Dayan, launches a surprise attack into Crimea, the home of our main characters, and they get caught up in the conflict. Ike is a part of the Greel mercenaries named after his father and is a fledgling commander at the beginning of the game. And of course, through a number of circumstances, he's thrust into the position of leadership that causes the group to splinter because Ike is inexperienced. The group is forced to flee south to the kingdom of Gallia, the home of the Laguz, animalistic humanoids with the ability to transform into different creatures such as lions, dragons, herons, etc. And that that's where many of the main themes of the game reveal themselves. The plot delves right into themes like racism, moral ambiguity, with characters on both sides displaying shades of gray rather than a clear-cut good or evil. And you will follow Ike as he navigates these muddy waters alongside friends who are in some cases like him, and in other cases, part of the problem. This game maintained your expected grid-based tactics with a weapon triangle, permadeath classes, and supports, but it also introduced a number of gameplay mechanics to the series that are worth highlighting. For example, characters that hit level 21 would auto-promote to a new class, which was a very welcome change since you didn't have to wait for seals to promote a ready character. Well, everyone except Ike anyway. But Boyd and Oscar promoting early was mwah. That being said, this game ditched the overworld navigation introduced in the previous title, Fire Emblem Sacred Stones, and went back to the more linear progression, which meant you didn't have the ability to grind up characters as freely. They also opted out of arenas in this game, so getting the most out of each chapter was incredibly important for making sure your team was built like you wanted. This really caused me to reflect on exactly who I wanted as well, because I didn't want to waste any experience. To make up for this a bit, they introduced the camp in between each chapter where you could gain supports, have other conversations with characters that could lead to new items or supports, as well as the management of bonus experience and skills. This was the first Fire Emblem game in the West to feature skills, which would become a large part of later installments. And bonus experience was awarded for beating chapters and meeting certain conditions. And I would recommend holding on to that first batch of experience to level up characters you attain over time, or you could be a doofus like me and just dump it all into Ike, who can't promote till later anyway. And finally, the Lagoos offered a really interesting twist on the gameplay, as their human forms can't attack and they take time to transform. But the beast transformations were much more powerful than your standard units, so this introduced some tactical risks and advantages. Now, when this game came out, it was criticized for the amount of dialogue in it, which isn't unfair, but I'm a sucker for a story and characters, so I really don't mind. It was also criticized for outdated graphics, even at the time, and the simplicity of its gameplay. And of course, permadeath, which was later addressed with the rewind mechanics and casual mode in later Fire Emblems. So if you just took this game, spruced the graphics up a bit, and added some modern Fire Emblem mechanics, you have yourself a classic remaster. And again, this would work perfectly well on the Switch, because some of these text-heavy games, by which I mean almost every RPG, benefit heavily from the ability to pick up and put down at any time. And you know what? I'm probably most confident that we'll see this guy come back in some shape or form in the future. Fire Emblem is on fire these days. And Nintendo has already worked with Intelligent Systems to get some remasters or remakes out in the franchise, such as Shadows of Valentia on the 3DS. So while I don't think we'll see this immediately, I would actually bet on this one coming back, hopefully. But sometimes Nintendo actually doesn't want our money. So who knows? Number 3, Radiata Stories. As we've already seen from some of the other games on this list, Square Enix was pulling out all of the stops between 2004 and 2006 with an absolute barrage of big releases. They had every big name under the sun releasing a new installment. Games like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Drakengard, Kingdom Hearts, Star Ocean, Valkyrie Profile. It was an incredible time to be an RPG fan. But one smaller, no-named RPG that came out in 2005 was criminally overlooked. And this game was Radiata Stories. Compared to the multi-million-dollar sales of Final Fantasy XII, Kingdom Hearts 2, and Dragon Quest VIII, Radiata Stories didn't even crack 500,000 units. And man, did people miss out on this one. This is probably one of the most unique RPGs out there, brimming with personalities, charm, and humor. Radiata Stories starts you off by introducing you to the main character named Jack Russell. Yep, you heard that right. Who is the son of this famed warrior. He goes off to the Knights of Radiata, and you might expect this tale to unfold like any other. But nope, Jack gets knocked on his butt in the first round of this tournament that they go through, and just when he's expected to get home, the Knights Commander-in-Chief recognizes his name because of his father, and offers to bring him in anyway, given his potential. From here, the adventure kicks off with Jack joining Ridley, the girl who kicked his butt in the first round, and Gans in the Rose Cochon Brigade. Gans doesn't know what that means either. And from there on, the crew goes on missions, and Jack, a complete doofus, starts to sharpen his skills to fulfill his potential. There are lots of twists and turns in this story that I do not want to spoil, but it leads to the ability to recruit 150 characters overall, and a choice at mid-game that splits the ending. Troy Ice did an incredible job fleshing out the world and making nearly every single character unique with their own background and motivations, with their own daily schedule. This makes the adventure more intriguing and filled with all kinds of world-building opportunities when you take on side quests and chase down characters to recruit from the 4 different guilds. And did I mention you can kick people to get into duels for experience? It is hilarious and one of the ways you can recruit some of the characters. You never knew how much you wanted to kick someone in an RPG until you've played this game. That is, until you kick one of the guild leaders and they wipe the floor with you. But if you can manage to squeak out a win with some of these stronger fighters, it feels so good. And you're rewarded with insane amounts of experience and sometimes really good items. And the kicking mechanic doesn't stop there either. You can kick about anything on the map and find hidden items, which made exploring all of the buildings, rooms, side paths just that much more fun. It's such a strange mechanic to come up with, and I'm pretty confident this is the only RPG with it, but it totally works. And the battle system in this game was also pretty unique, though it was a bit more simple than your typical Tri-Ace game. When entering a battle, you go into an arena, much like Star Ocean, and you can freely run around, block, dodge, and attack. Jack can use a multitude of weapons that have different moves you can learn and equip depending on your weapon's CP, those are your combat points, that allow for some solid variety. But don't expect any major skills or abilities outside of super attacks called Voltiblasts. Outside of this, you can let your party auto-battle, or you can issue commands. It's no Xenoblade, but sometimes you don't need to go through 30 menus to build your character. I love you though, Xenoblade. I think this game does a really great job with its overall package, but I'd still love to see some quality of life features in a remake or an HD remaster. Or if Square and Tri-Ace did a follow-up, I'd be thrilled with that too. Recruiting all the characters can sometimes require some very annoying steps. High-End, for example, is a dark elf you could recruit pretty early in the game, but the only way to recruit him is to win 4 times in a row at gambling. There's no trick, there's no guarantee, you just have to get lucky. And 12,000 gold is on the line. It can be pretty frustrating for a completionist to have to save reload so many times for a character that ends up being pretty mediocre compared to some of the others. Progression in the story can also be ambiguous at times as well, but I think that's a two-edged sword. On one hand, you can find the time to go recruit people, which is genuinely fun. On the other hand, there are times where there's no clear cue about what you need to do next to keep progressing. One last thing, Square Enix, since you're obviously watching my videos, I wouldn't mind if you came up with a third ending. There are 2 here, and they're, well, I just would really love a third. All that said, I absolutely loved this game. It is an absolute joy to play. It's unfortunate that this game is stuck on the PS2, and I'm honestly not very confident we'll see a comeback for this one. There's a definite possibility, but because it's not well known and sold so little back on the PS2, this one may unfortunately remain stuck. But who knows? Hopefully I'm wrong, and we see that sweet announcement in a Nintendo Direct. Or seriously, Tri-Ace, you could just give us a Radiata Stories 2. Radiata Rebirth. Ooh, I like that. Number 2, The Last Story. The Last Story was another game developed by Mistwalker that came out in 2011 for the Wii in Japan and almost didn't make it to the States at all, if not for the effort of Operation Rainfall. Now, Operation Rainfall is probably one of the most notable and successful fan campaigns, as it's largely credited for being one of the major reasons games like Xenoblade Chronicles, The Last Story, and Pandora's Tower, 3 games stuck in Japan, came to the West. And so, our 3 games came to the States after all, and we saw Final Fantasy, The Last Story, release in August of 2012, making this the most recent game on the list. As for me, I had no idea Operation Rainfall was a thing. I just got bored one Saturday, looked up RPGs for the Wii, and saw that GameStop had Xenoblade Chronicles and The Last Story available during some crazy sale. Sakaguchi and Uematsu again? I exclaimed, and I was there. I traded in some games like a fool and got both games for about $5. And wow, huge shout out to everyone who participated in Operation Rainfall though, because your service is noted, and I am forever grateful. The Last Story primarily focuses on 2 major plot lines. One of war and the destruction of the land, and the other one, the budding romance between the main characters Zale and the Princess Callista. These 2 beauts on the cover. And the game does it brilliantly. It delves deep into the themes of love, loyalty, betrayal, and a changing world amidst a kingdom at war. This game is more linear than you might expect from an RPG, working with a chapter structure to progress rather than an overworld to traverse, but it still encourages exploration, as you can find side quests, treasure chests, and other goodies by looking around each chapter. In some cases, the side quests even opened up chapters you could totally miss and offer awesome rewards like special weapons and, of course, more story. My favorite kind of reward. Each Each chapter provides really interesting and diverse settings, so it manages to keep things fresh. And the voice acting in this game is some of the best. If you love RPGs because of the epic tales and characters they often introduce, this game is one of the best. It somehow manages to pull off the world, realism of characters, and multiple story threads beautifully. And we haven't even talked about the gameplay yet. The combat mechanics in this game are unlike anything you've ever seen in an RPG. It's like a single player style tactical RPG hack and slash with third-person archery and mage bombs. It's pretty awesome. Don't have a word for all of that. Nobody has attempted this. It was so good, in fact, that they added a multiplayer mode where you could do PvP and boss battles, like something you'd see out of an Uncharted game or something. And it worked. As you progress, Zale and team unlock new abilities, and it gets downright bonkers at some point. You'll run around, slice through things, drop some bombs, destroy some environments in one chapter, go in stealth mode in another by putting enemies to sleep, and sneak by. The gameplay in this game is so underrated, it's crazy. It made you think, figure out your strategy, and the boss battles could be super intense. This could introduce some frustration if you had trouble keeping up with all those new abilities you get, but overall, there is nothing quite like this. Have I already said that enough? Now, this game clearly pushed the limits of the Wii when it released toward the end of its life, especially in battle with some occasional performance issues. The combat system could also be a bit clunky at times, and the multiplayer lost its luster after a few boss runs or PvP. So if they did ever decide to bring this one back in the form of a remaster or a remake, I think they could add the tweaks needed to lock that frame rate and declunk the combat. This is another game that has a very small chance of coming back given Sakaguchi's comments about not wanting to spend time remastering old work. That being said, Nintendo has a knack for bringing back old classics that none of us expected. That and the last story characters are actually in Super Smash Bros., which gives me hope, but I think Nintendo would need to make this happen. And if they did, it would be incredible. This is a game that more people need to experience, and it's pretty much at the same level as number 1, Lost Odyssey. Lost Odyssey was an incredible experience. It is one of the most overlooked RPGs in my opinion, and it's another Sakaguchi Uematsu combo platter that was delicious. This game was released in 2008 on the Xbox 360, and like Blue Dragon, this was a Microsoft-funded project to continue to get that RPG support on the 360, and I am so glad they did. While Blue Dragon felt like Sakaguchi's attempt at the classic Final Fantasy formula, Lost Odyssey felt like a passion project from the industry legend. To start with, Sakaguchi intentionally kept the turn-based combat in order to focus on writing and the emotional impact of the story. He combined his efforts with Japanese novelist Kiyoshi Shimagatsu to create an incredibly emotional journey, following the main character Kaim, who is an immortal who's been around for at least 1,000 years. And you can find 30 stories in this game titled 1,000 Years of Dreams, where this game just hits you right in the feels. When the marketing cycle began for this game, I was so blown away by everything I saw, and I couldn't believe that something like this, a game that would give Final Fantasy XII a run for its money, was going to be on the Xbox 360. What was going on? And this game is ultimately what made me buy an Xbox 360. In fact, I bought this game before I even got a 360 because I was so hyped for it. And I had an awesome friend named Renee, remember that guy from earlier? He let me borrow his Xbox 360 because he knew how excited I was to play this game. I basically borrowed it until I could save up enough money to buy the 360 on my own instead of, putting money on my college loans. Sorry, Mom. So huge shout outs to Renee. Let's be real though. This game, like the last story, is Sakaguchi trying really hard not to call his game Final Fantasy. The last story, Lost Odyssey, I mean, come on. It even has a character named Seb. This game feels like it could have been Final Fantasy XII or 13 had Sakaguchi stayed at Square Enix. This game is set in the unique world where magic and technology coexist in the magic industrial revolution. And like I said, you play as the immortal protagonist, Kaim, who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders and has lived through it all, though he remembers none of it. The game starts with him in the middle of a war, completely wiping out his foes with no remorse on his face, and the transition from cinematic to gameplay was still to this day amazing. And when disaster happens and everybody's wiped out on the battlefield, Kaim just stands up and walks away. You'll progress through the story and your party will be built with both immortal and mortal characters, and the combination adds this emotional weight as they get closer. Why? Because Kaim and the immortals will continue to live while mortals they love will die, just like they always have for the past 1,000 years. This includes friends, family, everyone, and so Kaim struggles with keeping a distance from his memories that he's lost. And the 1,000 Years of Dreams really drive this home. These stories tell of Kaim's many experiences and they're so emotionally impactful, and you read them with sad or touching music in the background, which just makes it worse. I'm reminded of this example, A Hero's Return, where Kaim is in a bar with this other soldier. In short, some kid starts egging the soldier on and the soldier gets mad, so the kid pulls out a knife, Kaim knocks it out of his hand, and the kid flees, and afterwards, Kaim and the soldier talk. The soldier carries what he calls this sin stone that has regressively gotten darker as he's had to kill to survive in the war. He's afraid to return home and face his wife and daughter with this, and Kaim gives him a bit of a pep talk, tells him to go home to his family, because at least he has a family to go home to. The soldier finally sees the value in going to his family and he stands up to leave, and the kid comes back to shoot Kaim. The soldier, showing his heroism, jumps in the way of the bullet, and so Kaim, an immortal that cannot die, has to watch as someone gives their one and only life because they didn't know. Listen to the end of this story. Sprawled on the floor, nearly unconscious, the soldier thrusts the lever pouch in Kaim's hand. "Look at my sin stone, will you?" Maybe, he says, chuckling weakly. Some of its shine has come back. Blood spurts from his mouth, strangling the laugh. Kaim looks inside the bag and says, "It's sparkling now. It's clean." "It is?" gasps the soldier. "Good. My daughter will be so glad." He smiles with satisfaction and holds his hand out for the pouch. Gently, Kaim lays the pouch on the palm of his hand and folds the man's fingers over it. The soldier draws his last breath and the pouch falls to the floor. The dead man's face wears a peaceful expression. The stone, however, the man's sin stone, which is rolled from the open pouch, is as black as ever. And Kaim goes on a journey where he has to grapple with all of this, reclaim his memories, and face the past. Man, this game was intense. And just because the focus was on characters and narrative doesn't mean the turn-based combat is anything to sneeze at. They did a great job modernizing the battle system while keeping it turn-based, and it's one of the best iterations of this style outside of something like Persona, in my opinion. The party in this game, you can have 5 characters with 2 rows, the back used primarily to protect your magic users with low defense. The rows included this guard condition, where you had extra protection for the back row based on the HP of the characters in the front row, adding some complexity to your strategy. In battle, one of the main updates is the aim ring for the regular attacks. Now, this isn't technically new, as you had something like this from games like The Legend of Dragoon, for example, but this game takes it to the next level and rewards your timing with bonuses to damage, crit rates, accuracy, etc. Now, one of the really cool things about the immortal and mortal characters is that the entire concept of the amnesiac immortals becomes part of the skill system itself. You can do what's called a skill link between the two, and the immortal character Kaim, for example, can learn skills from the mortals, allowing you to mix and match their skill sets. This simultaneously reflects the game's plot and makes for some awesome builds, which is much needed in this game because it can be hard at times. And all of this works together to provide this beautifully cohesive, fun, and deep experience. I cannot recommend this game enough. While I think this classic is absolutely worth playing as is, I think the 2 big things I would love to see addressed if they were ever to remaster this game is the rate of the random encounters as well as the backtrack, though they're sort of one and the same. Some of the dungeons can be confusing if you're going in for the first time, and this is especially important for one particular optional dungeon called the Temple of Enlightenment, where you can get some awesome weapons and a secret spell, and because it's confusing, the random encounter rate can basically make it so that you gain like 20 levels by the time you leave. So I suppose it depends on whether your glass is half full or empty kind of person, but things like this don't really impede the overall experience. Now, it saddens me to say this is yet another one of those Mistwalker gems that we will probably not see come back. The good news is, again, it is backwards compatible on the Xbox Series X. So if you have a Series X and you're interested, go buy the physical copy of this game while you still can at a decent price. I really wish this game would get the full remaster treatment with some quality of life updates and was released on the Switch. It's so hard to be stuck on a TV for games like this when that kind of flexibility would be incredible. Nintendo, Mistwalker, make these games happen. The revival would generate so much hype, and these games are way too good to be stuck where they are. Who knows? We've seen studios change their mind, and I really hope Sakaguchi can make it happen. And surprise, before I go, I have a speed round for some honorable mentions that didn't make it in the list because they're technically available digitally on PlayStation or because I didn't play or beat them. So here we go. Star Ocean 3. This is one of my favorite PS2 games, period, and it's technically available on the PS5, but it totally needs a remaster. Bring it to the Switch, and it needs the same love that Star Ocean, the second story, are got. Skies of Arcadia. Never got to play this one, but I want to, and oh my gosh, look at those eBay prices. Pokemon Coliseum XD Gale of Darkness. Both of these Pokemon Coliseum games could definitely use some quality of life updates and extra polish, but I loved these and would love to see them come back. Speaking of Pokemon, I'd love to get get me some Gold Silver Crystal back, but done with some actual love and not just the Diamond Pearl remakes. But you know, I'd buy anything because I'm a sucker and I am the problem. Grandia 3. I never beat this one because I had a friend who let me borrow the first disc and I never got to play the rest, but I loved it. With 1 and 2 collection on the Switch, let's bring back the third. All of the Fire Emblem games. Dragon Card 1 and 2, anybody? Chrono Trigger. Is this game technically available everywhere? PC, mobile, Nintendo DS? Yes, but it's not on the Switch while Chrono Cross is. Why? Oh, and Tales of Grace's F, because that should have been on this list, but I remembered it too late. It's low-key my favorite Tales game of the entire series, and I don't feel like anybody actually talks about this game. Let me just say that I hope this video does not age well. I hope in the next few years I am completely proven wrong and all of these games come back. But even if they don't, if you're willing to invest the time and the money to get a retro setup and play some of these games, they're totally worth it. Okay, I'm done for now. Subscribe. See ya.
And shoutouts to Long Play Archive, World of Long Plays, Look Back Gaming, and Lacry. You guys are awesome, and I'll have their channels in the description below.